I'm so excited about this episode's sponsor, Studio Sweden. Studio makes amazing headphones with excellent sound quality without compromising battery life or design. Studio is offering Murder Road Trip listeners 15% off any purchase. Just follow the link in the show notes and use the code ROADTRIP. I'll be back to tell you a little bit more about Studio later on in the show. Before we get started, I would like to give a big thank you to the new October Patreon members, Kelly W., Sue S., and Sam S. Thank you so much for supporting Murder Road Trip. I don't know what I'd do without your support. Welcome to Murder Road Trip. I'm your host, Haley. Joining me on today's road trip is the co-host of the Harry Potter Revisited podcast, Kim Fritz. Kim, can you tell us about Harry Potter Revisited?
Harry Potter Revisited is a podcast in which me and my friend Felicia discuss each chapter of the Harry Potter books in order. One episode is one chapter, and we go through what happens in that chapter and then make crass comments along the way.
Crass comments indeed.
Yes. Terrible jokes and horrible innuendo. Just everything that one would not want their child to listen to. It's not a kid's podcast.
So you can't play this after you read your child a chapter of Harry Potter?
No, it would not. I mean, you could, but you wouldn't be a great parent.
What book are you currently on?
We are on Wednesday. We are recording the last 2 chapters of book 1.
Oh my gosh, already. It feels like just yesterday you were getting started.
I know. Our little baby podcast is slowly maturing.
Oh. Well, I love Harry Potter Revisited, and Kim is a good friend of mine, and I love listening. I feel like I'm just hanging out with you and Felicia, which I did in person a couple weeks ago when I went out to Pennsylvania and we went to the Harry Potter Festival.
Yes.
You two are the same in person as you are on mic. So
yes, just rude jokes.
It's really fun. It feels like you're hanging out with 2 friends. Like you're the third person there, and it's actually really hard to listen because I want to yell my comments in there too. And you guys have a lot of fun jokes like, what's the purpose of a quill? You know?
Yeah. Yep.
Lots of good points. So I would definitely encourage all Harry Potter fans to listen. And if you haven't read the Harry Potter books, it'd be fun to read a chapter then listen.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're slowly, at this point, you could, read through the book and there's enough banked that you could actually, have a couple episodes.
That's true. It's so interesting to read Harry Potter as an adult. Kim and I were just talking about this last night, about the books we hated or not hated, but disliked as kids. And then it's like, as an adult, you have a whole other appreciation for them.
Mm-hmm. The meanings of the book changes. You see that from other characters' sides rather than just Harry's.
Yeah. And Harry kind of comes off as a whiny bitch.
Yep.
I don't know. It's very nostalgic, and I was listening. I remember when the podcast first came out, I was like, I need to go back and reread this book, even though I just reread the series a year ago. I was like, they're bringing up details that just you forget. And so anyway, I love the podcast, and like I said,
thank you.
Everyone should listen.
That's very nice. Thank you.
Where can listeners find you?
We're on iTunes and Stitcher, and I think a bunch of other apps filter through there, but we also have a website, harrypotterrevisited.com, and you can find all of our social media stuff at that website.
Awesome. Thanks for being my road trip buddy.
Thank you.
For today's episode, we will be traveling to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, as we discuss the murder of Laurie Show. In a strange turn of events, Kim ended up choosing the snacks for today's road trip. Since she's from the area, I thought, why don't you pick the snacks? Who else could pick better snacks than a local resident? So Kim, what snacks did you pick?
I went with Lancaster caramels because obvious reasons. They're delicious and they are named for my town. Also went with Snyder's pretzels of Hanover because Hanover is a hop, skip, and a jump away, and they're pretzels.
So when Kim told me what snacks she picked, I was like, oh, you guys have a caramel company? Never heard of it. And then she sent me a picture of the bag, and I was like, those are my favorite caramels ever. Like, they melt in your mouth. Oh my God, they're so good.
I don't know how you can have a favorite candy and not know the name of it.
Well, I knew the name of it, but I just didn't put two and two together. And I kind of tried to like block those caramels out of my mind because I was so addicted to them. I was like, I will get diabetes if I keep eating these. So I did block them out. And then I have not had these pretzels you speak of, but I will be making you send me some.
Yes, they're very good.
Kim also picked the topic for today's road trip. Kim, what made you pick the murder of Laurie Show?
I was raised 2 miles from where Laurie was murdered. My grandparents lived in the same apartment complex where she was murdered, and my grandmother knew Laurie's mom, as well as my grandfather worked where Laurie's parents met and fell in love. And this murder is a very big Lancaster well-known crime. Everyone still talks about it. If you bring it up to anyone over the age of 25, they know exactly what you're talking about. It's an infamous case in Lancaster.
Yeah, when you brought this up, I thought, what is so special about this case? It seems like we've all got an infamous case, and then I Googled it thinking, there's not going to be a lot. We're going to have to heavily rely on your details, which is totally fine, but you know me, I love to have as many details as possible. And I looked it up, and there's like a Wikipedia page, there's been multiple documentaries, and then that really piqued my interest. I was like, okay, so there must be something really special. And by golly, there sure is.
Yeah, it is. There's a reason that it is a well-known case.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah.
On that note, are you ready to go?
I am.
We lost the station again.
Keep trying.
Hold on. Let me try this one.
Stop. That's it. Turn it up. Turn it up.
Laurie Michelle Show was born on January 27th, 1975, to Hazel and John Show. When she was born, the umbilical cord was wrapped 3 times around her neck, so her parents always considered her a gift. Hazel Laurie Show, whose maiden name was Haas, was born in a big family and was very poor growing up, while her future husband, John Show, was the son of a prominent doctor who was very well off and went to a private school in Philadelphia. When they met, they both worked at Sperry, New Holland, which made farm equipment and other sort of machinery like that. My grandfather, like I said previously, worked there around the same time they did. Hazel worked odd jobs before eventually finding her longest job, which was at Community Hospital in Lancaster. Community Hospital is now closed. Hazel and John would split up and reconcile repeatedly from 1977 to 1985 when they finally divorced. Laurie had no siblings, but she did have a cousin, Dean, who was like a brother to her. They grew up in the small township of East Lampeter, which is where I currently live. There's not a whole lot of crime in this area, mostly drugs and shoplifting, and in 1991 there hadn't been a murder in 10 years in this township. Like I said, a lot of farms, a lot of farm land, a lot of shopping areas, but no violent acts, no crime.
That sounds like a good place to raise a family.
That is what I think a lot of people believed at the time, anyway. The high school that Laurie went to, Conestoga Valley High School, it's a fairly large school. When I was going there, it had about 900 kids over the 4 grades, which are 9 through 12. So, that's like 150 kids now, like 200 kids per class or so. So you don't know everyone, but you know of people. Laurie had fallen into a bad group of kids for a little while when she was 15. Since Hazel knew 2 police officers, she had them come speak to Laurie and try and get her to realize that there are real consequences involved with her actions. And after that, Laurie stopped hanging out with these people who were had bad influence on her and started trying to find a good group of friends. She was in the 10th grade and 16 years old in 1991.
Wow. I think we all go through that phase where we hang out with the wrong people. It's good that Hazel brought a police officer over to talk to her.
To me, I guess that's a little drastic, but at the same time, she, it worked. So I guess I can understand. She would have seen how badly the other kids were acting, so she knew what was best. That's why I don't have kids.
Yeah, it seems hard.
Mm-hmm.
In June of 1991, Laurie met 20-year-old Lawrence Stewart Youngkin, and he sometimes went by Butch. Lawrence had recently broken up with his fiancée, Lisa Michelle Lambert, who went by Michelle. The two had been dating since July of 1989 and were living together at the time of the breakup. Over the course of 8 days in late June, Laurie and Lawrence went on a few dates. One of the dates ended with Lawrence allegedly raping Laurie in the back of his van. Although Lawrence allegedly raped her, Laurie saw him a final time in early July. And we're saying allegedly here because, as you'll find later, Lawrence was never convicted of this crime, so we're going to refer to it as allegedly. Laurie and Lawrence were talking in Laurie's apartment parking lot when her mother, Hazel, came outside and told Lawrence she had just received a phone call from his ex-fiancée, Michelle. Michelle had told Hazel that she was 3 months pregnant with Lawrence's baby. Hazel told Lawrence he needed to go back to Michelle. Lawrence took Hazel's advice, and his short-lived relationship with Laurie ended. Michelle was livid after learning that Lawrence had been dating another woman during their breakup. Michelle became fixated on Laurie and began harassing her soon after getting back together with Lawrence. Michelle's harassment of Laurie began with phone calls to her apartment and quickly escalated into physical altercations. In mid to late July, Michelle went to Laurie's place of employment and waited outside for Laurie to get off work. As Laurie headed to Hazel's car, Michelle grabbed her and pushed her into a wall. Laurie ran to Hazel's car and got in. Hazel had witnessed the attack and reported it to police that evening, though police said there was nothing they could do because Laurie had left the scene of the crime. In August, Laurie and Hazel were shopping when Michelle came up to them and started screaming at Laurie. Michelle screamed that Lawrence and Laurie had had sex. Hazel told Michelle that the sex was not consensual. Lawrence had raped Laurie. Hazel also told Michelle that she would press charges if the harassment did not stop. In November, Laurie was hanging out with some friends in the mall parking lot when Michelle showed up. Michelle immediately started verbally assaulting Laurie and eventually beat her head against a car. As she left, Michelle told Laurie that she would kill her if she went to the police. After Laurie told Hazel about the altercation, Hazel filed a police report. I just have to say this. Laurie is really great about telling her mom about what's happening when a lot of teenage girls, or just teenagers in general, would feel uncomfortable talking to their parents about these kinds of things. And also, Hazel was very diligent.
Mm-hmm. It seems like they had a very good relationship, and that she definitely trusted her mother's insight, especially after getting away from that bad group of friends. She kind of seemed to realize, like, oh, my mom knows what's going on.
Yeah. From July to November, Michelle had devised many plans to embarrass and harass Laurie. The first plan consisted of finding an accomplice, luring Laurie out of her house, cutting her hair, and tying her to a pole in the city limits. As the months went by, Michelle continued to obsess over the plan, and she would even alter it if she wanted.
On December 20th, 1991, Hazel Show had a 7 a.m. appointment with Laurie's guidance counselor. Neither Laurie nor Hazel knew what it was about. The meeting was at CV Middle School, a 10 or 15-minute drive from the show home. Hazel arrived and waited 10 minutes before becoming frustrated by the counselor's lateness and leaving. She arrived back home around 7:30. A neighbor approached Hazel about a commotion in the upstairs condo, which belonged to Hazel. Hazel ran upstairs and found Laurie lying in her bedroom floor, still in the sweats that she slept in, covered in blood and fighting to breathe. Hazel screamed for someone to call 911 and ran to her daughter, trying to help her. She found a white nylon rope tied around Laurie's throat. She ran to get scissors and cut it off, only for Laurie's head to fall backward and reveal the gaping wound in her throat. Laurie's throat had been cut nearly to the spine. Hazel lifted Laurie's head, trying to keep the wound as closed as possible. Hazel held Laurie's face close to hers, saying, "I'm sorry, it was a setup. Who did this?" Laurie whispered, "Michelle. Michelle did it," through wheezes. Neighbors came into the room, checking for a pulse, as Laurie had stopped communicating. They felt a weak one, but she needed help as soon as possible. Paramedics rushed in, but did not go immediately to Laurie's aid. Hazel realized they thought she was the attacker, so she told them she didn't do it and that they had to help. Hazel went into the dining room to give the paramedics space. As the seconds ticked by, the medics didn't rush out with Laurie, so she realized her only child was dead. As the police arrived and approached Hazel, she told them Michelle did it.
That had to be so difficult for Hazel to leave Laurie's side.
We didn't touch on this, but in the books, in the weeks and months previously, Hazel had been stuck to Laurie because of all these attacks and everything. But so to get home and to find her and then realize that she has to give her space, like you said, that had to be traumatizing. The whole experience.
Oh, God. On the same night of Laurie's murder, Michelle, Lawrence, and their friend Tabitha Buck were bowling at the Garden Spot bowling alley. Police showed up and arrested Lawrence on an outstanding noise violation warrant and Michelle on an outstanding assault warrant against Laurie at around 10:30 p.m. Because Tabitha was at the bowling alley with Lawrence and Michelle, police brought her to the station for questioning.
Initially, Michelle, Lawrence, and Tabitha all claimed they had been attacked by 2 Hispanic women that morning, and that's why they had different injuries. They separated the 3 of them, and eventually Michelle would start talking. First, she said that she stayed outside of Laurie's apartment complex while Tabitha and Lawrence killed Laurie. Then she said she saw Tabitha attack Laurie. Then she said she was in the apartment but tried to save Laurie from Tabitha. And then she claimed that Tabitha was a crazed killer and Michelle had just wanted to talk to Laurie. And then Lambert said that Lawrence had only driven and that he wasn't there. Lawrence, at around 4 a.m., was told that someone was confessing. He wasn't told who. And so he opened up about what he knew, which was that he wasn't the killer, but that he knew where they had ditched some of the clothing and the items used in the murder. Lawrence said he also knew of the plan that the night before he had taken Michelle to Kmart at Kendig Square, and that he had waited in the car before driving Michelle to Tabitha's house. He waited in the car at Tabitha's house, but noticed in the bag of things from Kmart there was a ski hat and a nylon rope. The next morning, he and Michelle picked up Tabitha at 6:30 a.m., and he drove the 2 girls to the Oaks, which is the apartment complex that Hazel and Laurie lived at. He said that Michelle told him to drive to the McDonald's and stay there for about 30 minutes. The McDonald's that she's referring to was literally 1 street over from the Oaks, just as an awareness of the area. He drove past to pick them up 4 times before he saw them hunched behind bushes. He said he asked what had happened, but they wouldn't say. 5 minutes into their drive, Tabitha said, "The bitch scratched me." Lambert showed him that her upper lip had gotten kicked by Laurie. Michelle had blood on her hands and fingers, and Lawrence claimed he still didn't know that Laurie was dead. He told the officers that he was talking to, where he helped Michelle throw away the clothing. Lawrence and/or Michelle then gave police permission to search their trailer, which is never a good idea. They found a machete and blood-stained items all over the trailer, including a pillow with some blood smears. Michelle's story consistently changed to make her less culpable.
Michelle and Tabitha were both charged with first-degree murder and were held without bail. Prosecutors would seek the death penalty for Michelle, but not for Tabitha due to her age. She was only 17. Lawrence was offered a plea deal. In exchange for a full confession and truthful testimony, Lawrence would only be charged with hindering apprehension, which held a sentence of 3 to 7.5 years in prison. After signing the plea deal, Lawrence was charged with hindering apprehension and was held on a $1 million bail. Michelle opted out of her right to a trial by jury. Instead, she requested a bench trial. Michelle felt that she would have a better chance of convincing one person, a judge, instead of 12 people, a jury, of her innocence. Michelle's trial began on July 20th, 1992. During the trial, many people testified that they had witnessed Michelle threatening Laurie. The threats ranged from, "I'll beat her up," to, "I'll slit her throat." Lawrence also testified as part of his plea deal during the trial. Tabitha did not testify. One of the prosecution's key points was that Laurie told Hazel Michelle did it before she died. The prosecution had 2 experts testify that even with her extensive neck wounds, it was still possible for Laurie to whisper. The defense only had 1 expert testify that it was not possible for Laurie to whisper. In his closing argument, Michelle's defense attorney stated that Michelle could not have committed the murder because none of Michelle's hair or blood was found at the scene. He also argued that Michelle's account of events had not altered since her original confession. These were facts that proved Michelle was innocent. In his closing argument, the prosecutor argued that Michelle's account of events did not make sense, let alone match the evidence in witness testimony. The prosecutor also argued that Michelle had the motive to kill Laurie, not Tabitha. After the prosecutor finished his closing statement, the judge adjourned. On July 27th, the judge found Lisa Michelle Lambert guilty of first-degree murder. Later, the judge forwent the death penalty and sentenced Michelle to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Tabitha's jury trial began on September 21st. Lawrence testified at the trial, per his plea agreement, and the prosecution and defense both agreed it would be a bad idea to have Michelle testify, so she was never brought on the witness stand. After 7 days of trial, the jury was ready to make their decision. The jury found Tabitha guilty of second-degree murder. Later, a judge sentenced Tabitha to the minimum sentence, life without the possibility of parole. When both Michelle and Tabitha's trials were finished, the prosecution altered their plea agreement with Lawrence. During his testimony at both trials, it was found that Lawrence had committed perjury. In December, Lawrence pled guilty to third-degree murder. He was sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison.
Several of Michelle's appeals were denied, first in July 1994 and then in March of 1995. In 1996, Michelle wrote a petition to the U.S. District Court in Philadelphia. In January 1997, Michelle's new attorneys, who she got because the judge she sent the petition to sent an email to them, filed a petition stating false imprisonment, saying they'd uncovered 95 incidents of prosecutorial misconduct. Her lawyer claimed they framed Michelle because 3 officers from East Lampeter Township raped her in the summer of 1991. Judge Dalzell set a hearing for March of 1997. Michelle's attorney claimed Michelle had been set up by the police for Lawrence and Tabitha's crime to quiet her from her alleged gang rape. D.A. Maidenspacher from Lancaster argued Michelle isn't credible or believable, that her house of cards would fall. He agreed the police work may have been less than perfect, but Michelle was by no means framed. Michelle's lawyer brought an expert who claimed Laurie wouldn't have been able to speak and wouldn't have been conscious seconds after her throat was slit. This expert claims the coroner was lying in saying she could speak. They called someone who knew Michelle to claim Lawrence had a butterfly knife and once dunked her in a pool and held her under, and that he was controlling and abusive. Michelle took the stand and alleged an officer began following her, hitting on her, and eventually raped her with 2 other officers. The officers were not told of the date until Michelle actually testified, but when they were told that June 17th was the date they supposedly raped her, one of the officers remarked he was on his honeymoon out of the state on that date. Michelle claimed Laurie was harassing her. Laurie repeatedly tried to kick her in the stomach, but Michelle had never hit her. Michelle claimed Lawrence and Tabitha were going to beat Laurie badly, but Michelle tried to talk them out of it because she thought Laurie was pregnant. Lambert claimed to Dalzell she wouldn't let her first lawyer bring up the gang rape because she feared for the life of her baby. Dalzell believed the officers had been coached by the prosecutor on how to respond to the rape allegations. Hazel had a memory that she brought to the judge that was in line with a piece of Michelle's story, that she had seen them further down the road than the prosecution claimed. I was a bit confused by this whole part of the book and why it was extremely important, so I'm just going to be honest with you there. Do you know which part I'm talking about?
My understanding is that Michelle told police and her defense attorneys that as they were driving away from the scene when Lawrence picked her and Tabitha up, that they saw Hazel coming into the entrance of the apartment complex. And Lawrence took Michelle's head and kind of threw it down so that Hazel wouldn't see her. And Hazel did not remember this remark until Michelle was up on the stand. And so she went and she talked to somebody and she said, "Oh, that part of Michelle's testimony is correct. I really did see them driving away as I arrived." And somehow that put it in the judge's mind that Michelle's entire testimony was correct, when really that doesn't change anything at all.
Okay, because that's what I have, because after Hazel told the judge that she had this memory and that part of the story actually happened, the judge immediately said he'd be releasing Michelle from the prison for the remainder of the PCR hearing.
Never in my life have I heard of such a thing.
No! This... Well, I'll get to that in a minute, but first...
A quick word from our sponsor. When I received my studio headphones in the mail, I was overcome with excitement. I am something of a headphone snob. I'm extremely picky. I need my headphones to block out all other noise, have a long battery life, and comfortably fit my tiny ear holes. When I put the studio headphones on, I couldn't believe the sound quality. Plus, the headphones are so comfortable and the battery lasted for 8 hours. It's perfect for listening to podcasts all day. The headphones are lightweight, yet durable, while still being sleek and stylish. They are the perfect headphones, and free worldwide shipping means I can send a pair to Jess for Christmas, but shh, don't tell her. Make sure you take advantage of their special offer for Murder Road Trip listeners. Just go to studiosweden.com and enter Road Trip to receive 15% off any purchase. That's Studio Sweden, SUDIO, Sweden.com, and enter Road Trip. Now back to the show.
It was April 16th, and Michelle hadn't been free in 6 years. So for the remainder of this hearing, she would be staying with her two attorneys. After Michelle left, D.A. Maidenspacher the next day in court requested that Dalzell reverse his decision to release Michelle. Dalzell denied it. The DA also requests that Dalzell remove himself from the case. Dalzell again denied his request. Dalzell also said he was going to order a federal investigation into the East Lampeter Township Police and the Lancaster DA's office. And from court transcripts, it seems like he was almost giddy to do this.
So weird.
It was very strange. He definitely seemed to already believe that Michelle was innocent prior to ever having heard any of the evidence against her or for her.
So not knowing anything about, Lancaster or anything, or the judges there, I did read that Dalzell was known for being, hardcore and was always sentencing people to the maximum he could, and he just was, not... I don't want to say he wasn't fair, but he definitely held some power.
I have memories as a child that there was... Now, none of this is substantiated, of course, but there were rumors that there were improprieties happening between Michelle and Judge Dalzell. I'm not going to go beyond that because I don't want to be sued. But as far as I'm aware, there have never been anything substantiated, but there has always been rumor of such. After Michelle was released, Hazel again took the stand and told the same story she had told at the first trial. Michelle's lawyer said this was the worst case of prosecutorial misconduct ever. Literally ever. She was like, done. We have found it. Guinness Book of World Records style.
Not Adnan Saeed's case.
No. Nope.
None.
Not, the one from To Kill a Mockingbird. None of that. This is the worst one.
Okay.
She also said that Lawrence and Tabitha killed Laurie. After 14 days of hearings, Judge Dalzell ordered Michelle's conviction overturned and said she could not be retried. He found her actually innocent in what he described as, quote, an extraordinary, indeed it appears, unprecedented case, end quote. Now, when I asked my folks about this, and keep in mind they were very aware of this case when it was happening, they were following it, they said that they got the impression that Dalzal wanted to be famous, that this was the case that was going to make him, like, that people were going to know his name because he found something so unbelievable that he was going to be well known as, like, the fair judge, the judge who helped people, or whatever.
I just cannot help but roll my eyes.
It's astounding. Dalzal said he didn't believe that Laurie said Michelle did it. The judge also believed the detective had lied about a witness hearing Michelle say she was going to slit Laurie's throat. He believed video had been edited and crime scene photos altered. He believed police destroyed evidence. He believed they created replica sweatpants that were smaller to make it less believable that Lawrence could have worn them. He basically believed all of the conspiracy theories.
So this is a bigger conspiracy than O.J. Simpson.
Or JFK, anything. It's just this huge, like, everything that he's saying he believes makes this it includes more and more people the more stuff he says he believes.
I read a quote, I can't remember who said it, I want to say it was the prosecutor, said something like 40 or 50 people had to be lying to be in on this conspiracy to make one person's story true. So what are you going to believe? 40 or 50 people, or one person who's on trial who wants to make herself seem like a victim?
Right. And that, like, Occam's razor, it says the most likely thing to be true is the thing that is the easiest, usually. You know, when you like shave away all the random crap, the thing that you get down to, the smallest piece, is usually the truth.
I cannot believe that a judge fell for this. Two highly ranked defense attorneys also fell for this. Like, they were high sought after. They fell for this. The judge fell for this. It's like, how can you believe this? And her story got more and more elaborate as it went.
Mm-hmm. And it changed constantly.
Yeah, I'm just like, Tabitha had zero motive. Why would she be the one to kill Laurie? And why would Michelle try to help Laurie? I'm just like, what?
Well, there's still more. Like, that isn't even the worst of it yet. After Dalzal findings, after he released Michelle and said she was actually innocent, Lancaster was outraged. I was 7 when this is happening, and I remember it very clearly. Reading this book, my blood was boiling at this part, because, like I said, at 7, I didn't understand what was happening, but I still was pissed off about it, because my parents were both outraged, and they signed petitions to have Dalzal impeached, and like I said, there were a lot of rumors, which I'm not going to discuss, but there were rumors. Nothing has been substantiated. I want to keep saying that. Nothing has been substantiated. I'm not saying it happened. I'm simply saying that things have been posited. When Tabitha Buck found out, she sobbed in her jail cell because she knew what Michelle had done. A guard came in to comfort her, and she told the guard that she'd seen what Michelle did. To me, this is just, if a prison guard's coming in and comforting you, that just seems like someone who's having a really hard day.
Right, and I read that Tabitha had just moved to the school. She had been kind of bounced around her whole life. She had a really bad childhood. She was an honor student. She was a good student. And it seems like she wanted some friends. And maybe Michelle and Lawrence were there for her. I definitely don't think she was innocent in this whole thing. But it's like...
Right.
But you're right. If a prison guard is coming in to comfort you, she must not be a terrible person.
Right. And she's a kid, you know. She's still, at this point, she would have only been 23. That's still very, very young. So after Michelle got out, she lived with her lawyers for 3 months before moving in with a friend for a bit, and then she got a place of her own. In December of 1997, 9 months after being freed, the Third Circuit Court overturned Dalzal's ruling, stating that Michelle hadn't exhausted her state appeals before going to federal appeals. She was ordered back to prison. She re-entered prison on February 4th, 1998, having been free for 10 months.
Wow.
Having been freed and told you're actually innocent and you can never be tried again, I imagine your guard is down, and then to have that come back at you would be like... I mean, I don't feel sorry for her, but for anybody, that would be like a slap in the face. A state DA was brought in to argue in the Lancaster DA's place as there was a quote-unquote conflict of interest allegation. The state DA, Christy Fawcett, looked at the trial transcript and found no impropriety, so she didn't find the improprieties in the first trial that Judge Dalzell found. At this appeal, Michelle's lawyer claimed the police took Laurie's body back to the condo the night she died and staged the crime scene photos. So again, this conspiracy is getting bigger and bigger, and this very high-ranking lawyer is believing it all. Every official questioned during this appeal adamantly denied Laurie's body was moved from the morgue, which was located in a basement of a very busy nursing home, taken through several townships to be repositioned to pose crime scene photos. Denied by every single official, which this is where that 45 or 50 people number comes in. During this appeal, there was a new witness for the prosecution. Tabitha Buck decided that she couldn't live with her conscience anymore. Her words were that she didn't want to confess to make things worse for Michelle. She wanted to confess what happened for Hazel because she felt that Hazel deserved to know what happened to her daughter. It seems like she did a lot of soul searching while she was in prison. So Tabitha's story goes as follows. On December 19th, 1991, Michelle came to Tabitha's house around 10:30, while Lawrence remained in the car. Michelle was upset about Laurie ranting and raving around her house. Tabitha asked Michelle what she was going to do, and Michelle said, kill her. Michelle said Tabitha should wear her hair up with no makeup or nail polish on the next morning. Lawrence and Michelle picked her up on the next morning, and Lawrence dropped the girls off in a field beside the Oaks condo complex. Tabitha had worn her hair down like normal and had worn regular colored clothes, thinking that Michelle was all talk. They found Laurie's apartment, and Michelle had Tabitha knock on the door and ask for Hazel Show. Laurie answered the door, and Michelle pushed inside, and Laurie and Michelle were physically fighting. Laurie broke away and tried to get past Tabitha, but pulled off her sunglasses. Michelle had a knife and grabbed Laurie, and they continued fighting, Laurie trying to take the knife. Laurie tried to run to her bedroom, but Michelle grabbed her by the hair and then cut her hair off. Laurie had a phone in her hand, but Tabitha doesn't know what happened to it after that. Laurie was on her knees in front of her bed, and Michelle hit her repeatedly in the back of the head with the butt of the knife. Michelle tried to wrap a cord around Laurie's throat, so she laid down the knife. Laurie tried to grab scissors, but Tabitha moved them out of reach. Michelle told Tabitha to cut Laurie's throat, but Tabitha said no. Michelle then grabbed the knife and stabbed Laurie in the leg and said for her to stop struggling. Michelle told Tabitha to hold Laurie's legs. Tabitha sat on Laurie's legs, facing away. When Laurie's legs stopped moving under her, she looked and saw Laurie's throat was cut. Michelle was sitting on Laurie's right, holding the knife. Tabitha asked if Laurie was dead. Michelle said she didn't know, and began further cutting her throat, holding her chin up so she could cut it more deeply. When the tip of the knife broke, Michelle gave it to Tabitha, who put it in her coat pocket. Tabitha grabbed her sunglasses and then left. On August 24th, 1998, Judge Stengel found Michelle's petition had no merit. In Stengel's opinion, he wrote that the things Dalzell found as legally relevant were had sensational appeal and nothing further. He cited a poem Michelle had written to Lawrence while in prison in 1992, where she begs him to pull her hair, call her a prostitute, ram his penis inside her for hours, and hurt her till she cried. He said these were the correct depictions of Michelle Lambert. She was not, in his words, a demure, dominated, controlled victim. Every attack she planned or committed against Laurie demonstrated her real character.
Wow. I'm just speechless by the whole thing.
I know. That, when I read the part about Michelle pulling her head back to expose more of her throat and then cutting more deeply into it, my whole body just, like, I get chills because just the thought of that, of what Laurie was going through at that moment. Because she was still alive.
Yeah. At
that moment. Like, I don't know if she's breathing, but she's still alive. She was still moving.
So terrible.
And I agree with Stengel. That poem she wrote to Lawrence does depict who she is. She can pretend to be whoever she wants to be when she knows people are watching, but when they're not, that's who she is. She shows it.
Definitely, and I know in the first trial that's also what the prosecutor said. because the defense sort of made Michelle look like this young, innocent girl. You know, she came in with like a white dress and looking young and innocent,
And she started going by Lisa again.
she said Michelle was dead. So, I don't know. This whole case is mind-boggling. The details are pretty straightforward, right? I mean, Michelle was obsessed with Laurie. Laurie potentially was going to press charges against Lawrence for raping her. I don't think that was really the motive behind Michelle killing Laurie. I think Michelle was just obsessed, somehow had it in her mind that Laurie was still obsessed with Lawrence, even though she had a new boyfriend and didn't even care about Lawrence anymore. And she could not deal with this woman being alive. She obsessed over this plan to harass Laurie, and instead she just killed her. And she brought a poor innocent girl along with her. Tabitha still involved herself. That's very true. I don't think Tabitha should have received the same exact sentence as Michelle. You know, we're never going to know exactly what happened that day, but I can imagine it was pretty much along the lines of what Tabitha said. She had nothing to lose. She didn't have a deal to get less time.
No, she said, I mean, she got nothing for it except the feeling of telling her victim's mother the truth. The feeling of knowing that she did right by Hazel. I mean, eventually. Not originally, of course, but eventually she did what was right.
Michelle just reminds me so much of a spoiled kid who finds themselves in trouble, and the lie just keeps getting bigger and bigger. You keep digging this hole for yourself. And instead of just telling the truth, the lie keeps getting more elaborate and more unbelievable.
Yeah. Her emotional intelligence, I don't think, was very high because, like you said, she acted like a child. Her regular intelligence, like her intellect, she was very smart, but emotionally she was very stunted. Had she not murdered someone, I feel like she would have gotten very far in life just through sheer manipulation of people. Did we mention in this at all that she was pregnant, 7 months pregnant, when she murdered Laurie?
No, we didn't. I said she was 3 months pregnant in July. But yeah, when she murdered Laurie, she was 7 months pregnant. It's just crazy to me that someone would be so obsessed. Well, after the trials ended, Laurie's parents worked with Pennsylvania lawmakers to strengthen anti-stalking laws. In August of 2003, Lawrence was granted parole when he was 32 years old. He finished his parole in 2011, and it is rumored that he resides in the Lancaster, Pennsylvania area. Tabitha was able to earn her GED in prison, and she currently works as a tutor in the prison school. In 2012, it was ruled that life imprisonment sentences for juveniles was unconstitutional. Tabitha will be resentenced in late November of 2017. Since her initial sentencing, Michelle has been transferred between many prisons. She currently resides in a Massachusetts prison. Michelle received a bachelor's degree from Boston University, and she also wrote a book titled Love, Murder, and Corruption in Lancaster County, My Story.
I will not be reading that.
I cannot even imagine the stories she has had time to come up with.
Oh, I'm sure it's based on the same stuff, but just even more fantastical. She will not take responsibility for what she did. And I don't know that she ever will. I don't think she physically is able to take responsibility.
It's like once you get caught in a lie or once you start acting like this, it is hard for some people just to admit that they were overreacting or that they lied. It's easier to them just to keep building on this lie, even though to us we're like, just give it up. Wouldn't that just be easier? But no, to them that would be admitting defeat.
Nope, she had to double down.
Well, I've got a couple questions I wrote as I was reading through everything. Do you think that Lawrence was present for the murder like Michelle said he was?
Before I read this book, I didn't know, like, the intricacies of the crime. I only knew what, like, I'd seen in the paper was that, you know, Tabitha and Michelle are the ones who were found guilty, and they claim Lawrence wasn't there. But after reading this book and seeing Tabitha's account, I do believe that he wasn't in the condo. I believe Tabitha's account, which is that he dropped them off and drove away.
I believe you because the evidence shows that. It shows that he went and dropped them off and then went to the McDonald's. They even had the McDonald's employee that checked him out testify that he was there at the time of the murder. He definitely dropped them off and picked them up. You know, he was involved, but I don't think he was in the house.
Right.
Do you think he should have been let out on parole?
See, that's... Yeah, he did his time, and I guess my frustration is more that he got so much less time than, like, Tabitha, who was a juvenile. When juveniles are given life without parole, that's always really difficult for me, because juveniles they're not fully developed yet, and I know that shouldn't affect my opinion on Lawrence, but for some reason it does. Like, if he got out, I feel like she should have a fair shake too. But she was there when Laurie was killed, so... Yeah, he did his time. He did his parole.
Pretty ballsy of him to move back to the town, though.
He never came across as the brightest, or... You know, and his family is from Lancaster, so I guess... You know? And I've known people who have run into him.
Just awkward.
It is massively awkward. I imagine 10 years ago when he had first gotten out, it was super awkward, and now, I mean, he's older. It's not as fresh. I'm sure he goes days without people being like, "Aren't you that Butch Yunkin?" But, you know, I'm sure he went through quite a few days where it was pretty constant.
Yeah. Do you think that Laurie told Hazel that Michelle did it?
I think if she didn't actually vocally say it, I think she mouthed it. I think she said it enough that Hazel understood it. Because even if I'm having a full-fledged asthma attack, which, I mean, isn't the same thing, I know. But if I'm having a full-fledged asthma attack, I can still wheeze out stuff. So, and with several experts saying, yeah, she could have done it, I mean, sure, why not?
And even if she hadn't, that's really just one small piece to the puzzle.
That's not all the evidence.
Right.
Like, there's several other pieces of evidence, including confessions.
Exactly.
I have a question for you.
Lay it on me.
Do you think that Michelle believes her lies?
Oh, man, that's a good question. You know, the psychiatrist didn't say that she had, like, some uncommon behavioral disorder. It wasn't like she had multiple personalities, you know, wasn't like she was schizophrenic or bipolar or anything like that. I think she's just a manipulator. I think deep down she knows what happened. Like I said, I think she's the toddler that gets mad and, you know, is just trying to run around in circles around this lie. And instead of just admitting what she did was wrong, she's going to continue to lie. Maybe she does believe her lies. But I think deep down she knows what she did. Maybe she's avoiding it. She could very well be avoiding what she did, because that would be a hard thing to live with.
The cognitive dissonance of, I just murdered someone. Yeah, no, I can totally see that. That's very true. Trying to deny it to herself, but...
Do you have any final thoughts on the murder of Laurie Show?
I don't know. I didn't know Laurie. My grandmother didn't know Laurie. She met Hazel after Laurie had already passed. But it feels, being this close to that and finding all these tangential connections makes me feel sad about this case, because it almost feels personal, which I know I have no ownership of it and I wouldn't want it, but it just feels, it's a sadness in Lancaster around this case. And I guess I just really, learning about it, the sadness has now infected me a little bit too.
Oh, yeah, there's something about living in the same area as a murder. It does make you feel connected. And I don't know if that's because you know some of the same people or because you know the area. It just helps you tie yourself to that.
Right. It, like, imprint on you.
Well, I'm glad you told me about this case. It's definitely fascinating, like we've talked about over the course of the episode. I was very interested when I was reading through the court transcripts and through the book. Well, thank you for coming along for the ride, Kim.
Thank you for having me.
Kim and I recorded this episode in early November. After we finished recording, new information regarding Tabitha Buck's sentence became available. On November 20th, 2017, Tabitha received a new sentence of 28 years to life. Tabitha has already served 26 of the 28 years and will be eligible for parole in 2020. Until next time, please remember to check your back seats, and I'll see you at the next rest stop. If you didn't know already, you can also listen to me on the We're All Just Pretending podcast, where I give bad advice on purpose. You can also find Jess and I on the Playlist podcast. Playlist is a podcast where Josh Hallmark of Our Americana and the Karen and Ellen Letters has different podcasters on to talk about their favorite songs. Every episode has a different theme and a new panel of podcasters. Jess and I also recently guested on a podcast called My Thing Can Beat Your Thing. On the episode, we had a battle between whose animal is better. The podcast is super fun. Please check it out. You can find Murder Road Trip at murderroadtrip.com, on Instagram and Twitter at murdertrip, and on Facebook at MRT Podcast. If you're interested in continuing the discussion, you can join the Murder Road Trip podcast group on Facebook. Make sure to check out the Murder Road Trip playlist on Spotify. You can even add songs to the playlist. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to rate, review, and subscribe on your podcast app of choice. Please stay tuned after the music to hear from some other great podcasts.
Hi, I'm Kim,
And I'm Felicia.
and we're from the Harry Potter Revisited podcast.
Each episode is based on the next chapter in the series.
We make inappropriate jokes and crass comments along the way.
Check out Harry Potter Revisited on iTunes, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast app.
Bye, Felicia.
Hey everyone, I'm Heather,
Hey guys, I'm Kim, and we are two sisters from Cincinnati, Ohio.
who hosts a new true crime podcast called
Nature versus Narcissism.
I have always been fascinated by true crime and the criminal mind, so I wanted to delve deeper into infamous cases as well as the lesser known to see if we can determine what made these criminals commit these vile acts.
Was it nature? Was it nurture? Or was it just plain old narcissism? Find us on Facebook, Stitcher, Instagram, Twitter, and Apple Podcasts. Rate and review, please.
And don't forget to subscribe.
Bye.